Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on supporting employees returning from maternity leave. I'm Hannah Booth, and I'm Content and Communications Manager here at MorePay. Now, we've got lots to cover this morning, but before we start the main presentation, we will run through some housekeeping. In terms of our agenda for this morning, we will be starting off by looking at the big picture and why supporting returning parents is good for your business. Michelle will then run you through some of the parental policies and procedures, and she'll then discuss how you can use kit days effectively. She'll also talk to you about ways in which you can prepare for an employee's return to make sure that it's a smooth one, and she'll also examine how you can deal with flexible working requests. Finally, Michelle will also discuss with you the importance of providing emotional support and open communication to your employees that are returning from maternity leave. And as usual, we'll have a live Q&A at the end of the main presentation where you'll have an opportunity to ask Michelle any questions that you may have. So in terms of how to ask a question, you'll notice that your microphones are on mute, but we do still want to hear from you. So please drop your questions into the question panel as shown here. We've had over 700 people register for today's webinar, so I imagine that we will receive quite a few questions, but we'll do our best to get through as many as we can at the end of the session. And don't worry if you do face any technical difficulties, because we will be sending everyone a recording and also a copy of the presentation today, so you will have that to refer back to. So I am aware that there will be some people on the webinar this morning that may not be familiar with MorePay, so I will give a brief introduction. We provide payroll and HR software, as well as outsourcing services to UK businesses. We've been around since 1966 and have all the accreditations you'd expect. Our promise is to make payroll and HR easy, and here's how we do it. We've built payroll and HR software that's easy to use. We deliver quality outsourcing options, and all of this means worry-free compliance for businesses. On the slide, you can see some of the businesses who trust us to take care of their payroll and HR. We're also award-winning, and on this slide you can see some of the industry awards and shortlists that we've picked up over the last couple of years. And if you'd like to learn more about MorePay, then drop me a message in the Q&A panel and one of my colleagues will be happy to contact you. Now, if you've attended any of our webinars before, then I'm sure you'll be familiar with Michelle. Michelle's our HR Services Director and has been with MorePay since 2017. She's CIPD qualified with 20 years of both operational and strategic HR experience. Michelle is responsible for running all HR services activities within MorePay. So I will now hand over to Michelle, who will take you through today's session. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I do need to apologise that I haven't got my camera on. We seem to be having technical difficulties with my camera, but at least you can hear me, and that's the main thing. So in terms of this webinar today then, the big picture of it is maternity dates all the way back to 1975 in terms of the UK first introducing legislation on maternity leave and the right to return to work after maternity, and that was through the Employment Protection Act. Over the years, we've seen a lot of changes and improvements to that provision to provide pregnant employees and those on maternity leave, and coupled with support for partners and husbands. In this webinar, I'm going to touch on some of the basics and fundamentals of legislation surrounding maternity, but the main focus in this masterclass is going to be about supporting your employees returning from maternity leave, how it benefits them, their well-being, alongside the benefits for your business. I am sure that there's many people on this call and webinar, myself included, who have returned from maternity leave or have experienced a wife or partner doing so. And I think we can all agree that it is a really challenging time for everyone. And so this webinar is going to be about what you can do as an organisation to support the employee, and we're going to dig just a bit deeper beyond what you are bound to do by legislation. So if we move on to the next slide then, this is about how supporting returning parents is good for business. And being clear, the way that you support someone returning to work benefits them, but it ultimately benefits the business and the way that they feel about your organisation. And when it's done well, it can lead to things like higher retention, better morale, which leads to stronger performance for them and for your business, and just an overall more inclusive culture, which is so important. But honestly, the risk of doing nothing is quite high, and the stats that you see on front of you are quite startling. It says that 1 in 5 mothers return full time to work within 3 years. So that's only 20% of women will return full time. 17% of women actually leave work completely within 5 years of having a child. The most shocking of all is that 74,000 women a year in the UK lose their jobs due to pregnancy or maternity leave, despite all the legislative support that we've got. And then 1 in 5 leave their employer because of their poor maternity experience, including returning to work. And honestly, I think these outcomes are often avoidable, and we could really lead the charge on improving these types of practices. And this is driven by things like making sure that you're focused in the right way, you're applying your practice in the right way, and you really support parents returning from maternity leave. It's basically just ask yourself what your organisation can do to improve these types of practices. What can you do differently, and how can you benefit? Because as it says on the slide there, the outcomes of these are driven by things like limited flexibility, high childcare costs, poor mental health, lack of support. And honestly, as a working mother myself, who some time ago but took 2 periods of maternity leave, I do like to think that the world has moved on since then, and there is more discussion and support and just a bit more of a positive focus on it. But I think this slide really showcases that we've not gone far enough, and that there's definitely more we can do. So the business case for getting it right then. What is the business case for your organisation to do this well and to do more than what you need to do? First of all, it's about retention, and retention really matters. It is far more cost effective. This applies in all circumstances, but particularly with maternity returners. It is much more cost effective to retain skilled people than to go out and replace them. So if an employee is returning and they feel genuinely supported, they are much more likely to stay, they're more likely to be loyal, and they're much more likely to perform at their best for you. I think juggling work and home life can be very overwhelming. It says on there at first, but I know that can continue for many years for parents in general. But if managers are able to offer some clarity, some empathy, some flexibility to those returners, it helps them regain their confidence faster, settle back in more smoothly, and ultimately improve their performance. It's an overall good indicator that you're supporting gender equality. So good return to work practices help keep women in that leadership pipeline. This is something that I've touched on in other webinars and other articles and blogs that we've done within More Pay about how to get women into leadership and into pipeline. And one of the areas that I am sort of most passionate about is women returning from maternity leave and the impact that that can have on their development. It really should challenge the idea that caregiving limits a career progression and limits what somebody has to give to their role and to their organisation. But overall, think about how this strengthens your brand around having an inclusive policy and a culture of support. That will not go unnoticed by your current employees and by your prospective employees. I think the world of work is changing, and the new generations that are coming through and will ultimately be your employees going forward have different expectations of what they want from a career, what they want from a job, and what they expect from their organisation. So this is an opportunity to enhance your reputation, make your organisation more appealing, and think about the future as well. So on to policies. And around familiarising yourself with policies. So this is just on the next slide. Thank you. Policies are a critical part of supporting your employees whilst also protecting your business. But it's important that it's not only those have been written, documented and regularly reviewed, whether that's by your HR team or an outsourced HR or legal support like ourselves at MorePay. But the more important part is that they're understood by your workforce and in particular by your managers, and that your managers have been trained on how these should work in practice and that they also understand the softer skills that underpin those policies and practices. So in terms of line managers, one of the most important things, and it's a common theme across lots of these webinars that we talk about, is the importance and the strength in training your line managers. Your line managers don't need to be legal experts in all aspects of the employment law framework, and this extends to maternity rights as well. Honestly, it's something that they may not come across very often during their time working for you. It might happen once or twice, it might happen more regularly. It's a bit of an unknown. So although they don't need to be legal experts, they do need some kind of working knowledge of your organisation's policy and key rights. A clear understanding for your line managers means that there are fewer compliance risks for you as an organisation, which is obviously something you really need to be aware of, particularly with the changes that are coming with the Employment Rights Bill in the future. It also gives better planning and support, and it also allows the managers to be much more confident in their conversations and dealings with returners. It says there, I really think this is important, about having a policy is one thing, but what matters most is that managers follow this through in practice and that they feel confident enough to follow this through in practice. So in terms of understanding the main parts of the parental leave framework, you will get a copy of these slides after the webinar is finished, so don't worry about writing it all down. But I just thought it's important to talk to you about the main elements of employment law framework that apply here, and that you've got a reference point back. So the first one is around statutory maternity leave, which gives a worker up to 52 weeks and the right to return to their same role if it's 26 weeks or less. But after that, the role must be the same or there must be a suitable alternative. In April 2024, there was an extension in redundancy protection, which covers pregnancy and 18 months after birth or adoption. And this basically means that priority must be given to someone who falls in that category when offering suitable alternative roles. There's the shared parental leave rights, which means that up to 50 weeks can be shared between parents, that caregiving responsibilities are evened out more. And we are starting to see that this is becoming more popular and realising the benefits of this in our society. In addition to that, once employees have returned from maternity leave, they are entitled to parental leave, which is up to 18 weeks per child up to the age of 18. It's usually taken in blocks. There are certain notice rules around it, but it's an option for employees to help them with their caregiving requirements as the child gets older. You've also got to remember, from a health and safety point of view, it's very important that you've got to carry out risk assessments during pregnancy and potentially after returning to work if needed. And that's something that we would definitely expect you to take advice on and make sure that you're doing that in the right way to support the employees. And then the final thing I just wanted to point out is around the Equality Act of 2010 and the protections and the safeguarding of discrimination and unfair treatment based on pregnancy or maternity. That's kind of just a real snapshot. As I said at the beginning, this webinar isn't really to focus on the main legalities. It's about taking you beyond that. But I think it's always important to go back and have a reference point to it. And it's something that's good for us all to refresh our minds on it. But then if I talk through the parental leave framework and about people returning to work and things that I think are really important for you to know. So in terms of role protection and workplace adjustments, if an employee is returning from maternity leave, as I said on the first slide, the previous slide, they have the right to return to the same job, or if it's gone past a certain amount of time, one that is equivalent in terms of duties, pay and status. And we see lots of examples in the press and in the tribunals around where this hasn't happened, and it has caused quite a lot of problems for organisations who haven't followed what they needed to. But I think in terms of managers, going back to the importance of managers here, managers need to be aware of their responsibility in this. They should always have HR support, but they need to be aware of what that means and their responsibility to consult if a role has changed, because failing to do this could result in a legal claim. So even if it's just minor amendments to the role, it's always worth checking, is this something that we need to openly discuss and consult the employee on? or even if it's something that doesn't fall within the legal framework, it's making sure that you're open and honest with that employee about what is different. In addition, if the returning parent has a disability or an ongoing health condition, and this could be related to their pregnancy or not, do think about reasonable adjustments that you may need to consider. Another important part of returning is supporting breastfeeding at work. And managers and organisations must ensure that there's suitable support in place to be able to do this. And this includes providing a clean private space where an employee can rest or express milk. And this should not be a toilet. That is not an appropriate place for a woman to express. Make sure they have access to a fridge for their milk storage, and be flexible in terms of allowing them to take breaks when they need to express or breastfeed. And it's all around promoting dignity at work and respecting their privacy, and understanding what they need to do for their family at home. It's sometimes a difficult topic for people to discuss. It's definitely something that comes with softer skills. It's something that you can talk to your managers about and make it a topic that is not something that is seen as you can't talk about it, you shouldn't talk about it, it's embarrassing. The more that people talk about this in the workplace, the more comfortable managers will feel. So this is definitely something that goes on understanding what the legalities are, but definitely more to the softer skills. And where you have got managers who may feel uncomfortable talking about it to their employees for whatever reason, give them their support, give them an alternative place to go and help them through this with their employee. And then the last point on this is just talking again about career development and progression. And as I said, this is something that I definitely advocate within the workplace, because I do still think that it is easy for returning parents to be overlooked for opportunities. And a lot of this comes from either unconscious bias or assumptions. You might be assuming that an employee does not want to be promoted because that promotion might involve more travel, and you're assuming that they don't want to do that and be away from their young child. My advice here would be, don't make those assumptions or fall into that trap of unconscious bias. Really think about how you have these conversations, be open to them, ask open questions, listen to what they have got to say. It can sometimes come from just a misplaced concern, but for the employee, it will lead to frustration, or in the worst case, it will lead to attrition. So avoid making those assumptions about their ambition or their energy levels. Make sure you're including returners in conversations about upcoming projects, stretch roles, development opportunities, new jobs. Treat them as you would treat other people in your team. Just make sure they've got the opportunity to ask questions or raise any concerns themselves. And then make sure you're offering the right training or development to support their re-engagement. So to bring this back, I just want to talk about how to deliver this effective management training, because the last few slides have all been about how you apply that framework and get the managers to really think about it. What we've discussed is what your managers should be well versed on. And as I said at the beginning, although you can't expect them to be experts, especially as dealing with maternity isn't often a regular or everyday occurrence, it's just important to make sure that the training you deliver to them is effective and practical and ongoing, and it should feature real life scenarios. In the complex world of employment law, it's always a good idea to try and bring situations and scenarios to life to help your managers learn. So you really need to think about clear examples of what good support looks like, a mix of delivery formats when you're doing this training, whether it's e-learning that they can go back to, they can take and they can watch back, live workshops, coaching, mentoring. How else can you help the managers feel confident in this area? Allow space for peer discussions and learning from others. There is so much beauty in learning from peer groups and learning from others, and allowing open discussions and real life experiences of other people, of the do's and don'ts, to help mean that your managers feel that they are effective in dealing with this. And then the practicalities of making sure that when laws update or internal policies are changed, that there's an ongoing review, and it's something that's kept up with. And as it says there, managers don't need to have all the answers, but they do need to have access to the right tools, resources, and support so that they get things right. On to kit days then. And this is all around common pitfalls to avoid when using kit days. I think that kit days are a really incredibly useful tool, although they are optional, but they can be incredibly useful for both the organisation and for the employee. And it's a really good and valuable way to show support during maternity leave. If they are used well, they can help returning employees rebuild their confidence at their pace and kind of ease them back into work. And the absolute key to this is open communication, clear purpose, and zero pressure from the organisation. It sounds like a tricky balance to get, but it is certainly doable. So, in terms of what kit days are, employees on maternity or adoption leave can use up to 10 keeping in touch days. Shared parental leave offers up to 20, which is split keep in touch days. Do remember that they are optional, should never be enforced. Using them does not end any kind of leave that you're on or statutory maternity leave. They are purposely given to help the employee stay in touch whilst they are on maternity leave. This benefits some employees and it doesn't benefit others. It's really led by them. Pay is not legally fixed, so it must be agreed between the employer and the employee. And if you are switching from maternity to shared parental leave, just remember that kit and split days can't be combined. So seek advice if you get one of those tricky situations. And the next thing then is just a bit of advice on how to use them well, just kind of 5 tools for you to take away. And again, you can read through these at your own leisure when you get a copy of the slide. But if you kind of just remember these 5 points, the first thing is it's starting with a conversation. So talking about kit days before leave starts, during check-ins, it then isn't an awkward conversation. It gives complete control to the employee and reassures them that there's no pressure to take these kit days, but they're there for their benefit if they want to. And the advice here is that conversation should always start with open questions where there is chance for a discussion. So do they want to use their kit days? What would they find helpful? Do they want to work remotely or join in person? Start these open conversations and make sure that it's known during their pregnancy that this is something. They might tell you during pregnancy, I don't want to use it. They might change their mind during maternity leave and think, actually, I would benefit from going in. So just keep the lines of communication over. If they choose to do a kit day, make sure that there is a clear purpose. I think one of the potential pitfalls that people can fall into is thinking, I don't want to overwhelm this person. And maybe they can just come in, sit around, chat to people and see what's going on. Now, whilst that may have some benefits, the flip side of that is the employee may just feel like they've not really got a purpose there. And the goal of kit days is to make sure that their confidence gets a boost, helping them reconnect and making sure that they feel like they're part of the organisation. So you could think about inviting them to a team meeting or a strategy session where everyone's involved. Even if they're just an observer in that, there's an actual purpose to it. It could be some professional development or refresher training that you might want to have, a general manager one-to-one, or they might have some kind of practice return day where you give them a proportion of their work to do. You might think of a project that needs doing and ask them to do a certain part of it. Just try and make sure that that day is meaningful and there is purpose to it. On pay, there is no set rate, so clarity absolutely matters. Some organisations top up SMP to full pay, which is obviously a benefit for the employee, and they might be more encouraged to take kit days if they know that they are going to get paid for them. It might work both ways and work really well for both the org and the employee. But just make sure that it's understood in advance. Make sure that your pay policy is documented, communicated, and consistent across the business. And then the last 2 points, first of all, is about staying flexible. It doesn't need to be a full day. Employees may prefer a short remote meeting or a half-day visit. Sorry, I think the slides haven't quite caught up because we're on the next one. There we go, perfect, thank you. So be flexible with what they look like, and then support what works for them based on how they're feeling and what stage of their leave they're at. It is very much driven by the employee. And then a key thing to making it a success is to follow up afterwards and keep that momentum going. Ask them how they felt the day went, check if they want to do any more, keep a record of the days used, and even just a short follow-up message shows that you care. In our team at the moment, we've got somebody who is on maternity leave and has come in to do a few kit days. And what we've tried to encourage them to do is just check in with various team members, just have a chat, an update. And then we followed up afterwards, even just great, it was lovely to see you, great to have you in the office, great to have you on remote. It just really encourages the employees to feel that they are supported and helps them for when they return. So on to preparing an employee for return. So just like kit days, I really think it's important to talk about what your organisation does overall to support employees returning, both before maternity leave and during maternity leave. It really sets the tone and is so important. And it just helps it become part of your overall culture of supporting wellbeing. And it's just this next couple of slides is about thinking of key steps to ensure that that transition is smooth. So in preparing for an employee to return, you just need to remember that it is a major life transition for an employee. And when managed poorly, it can lead to stress, negative experiences, or it could lead to resignation. So really thoughtful preparation does make all the difference. Again, start with early open communication, even before leave starts, set expectations, build that trust. The period is going to bring a lot of mixed emotions, so managers need to be able to listen with empathy. Before they go on leave, kind of agree some kind of contact framework and how that will happen, when that will happen, discuss the use of potential kit days, and confirm their intention on leave duration and provisional return date, although obviously that is completely flexible. During leave, do stick to those agreed contact levels and share key updates only. Just avoid overloading them. And then before they return, make sure you check in with them a few weeks prior, whether that's just a call or you meet them for a coffee. Discuss the logistics, any role changes that sit within the legal frameworks, talk about the overall organisation, the flexibility support options, and just make sure that they have a comfortable place where they can express any concerns that they might have. Number 2 then is sorting the practicalities. So if you think about a new starter, when they join, a good first day starts before they walk through the door. And this is exactly the same with an employee returning from maternity leave. I know myself on the first day after maternity leave, and it was only 6 months, that I felt like I'd completely walked into a new role. I very quickly got back into it, but that first step of walking through the door can be quite daunting. So thinking about that before, check that their laptops, logins and system accesses are all working. Make sure their desk or workspace is available. If anything's changed in terms of where they're sat, make sure they know in advance. Share clear updates on any changes in tools, policies and internal processes. Think about how that's going to be structured. Brief them on any new starters, leavers or team changes. And then start to flag the current priorities or projects that they'll be getting up to speed on. Structure of the first week and beyond, just like an induction for a new starter, is really important. So it's striking that difficult balance between not thinking that they know nothing and you are completely starting from scratch, but avoiding overwhelming them. Just build momentum gradually. Individuals will help guide you on this. Some will need time to find their rhythm. Others will just want to dive straight in. So the more you talk about it with the employees, the better, because flexibility is key. I think it's really important to give them a personal welcome back. Think about their return to work meetings, how you put in those one-to-ones to keep updated with them, give them that balanced schedule, get them up to speed and keep up with those first few months of one-to-ones. The last couple of points then is, first of all, around offering some flexibility and managing the workload. I'm going to talk about flexible working requests separately, so there's just more around flexibility when they are coming back in general. Supporting some kind of gentle return to work whilst respecting their individual pace is this whole striking a balance. You may offer them some kind of phase return if needed. So it might be that they might work shorter days for the first week or two, and this isn't a formal flexible working request. It might just be something that you are able to do. Help tailor the workload to what their current capacity and wants are, and just ask them themselves what support they'd find helpful. You may find someone who's like, do you know what, I just want to come in, whiz through my emails, crack on, I'll lead the charge. And you may have the opposite end of the spectrum where they ask for support with it. Just be flexible and be guided by them. Really, really avoid assumptions about what they want. And then sort of as they're returning and into those first few months of return, I will keep referring back to this about keeping development on the radar, because time away from work, and I really hope society is changing on this, doesn't mean that your ambitions disappear. Many parents returning do so with a fresh perspective, and that might have given them a strong motivation to re-engage with their career. They will have different goals in life now, so it's always important to just keep that channel of communication over, talk about their goals, offer relevant training or refreshers, just make sure to include them in discussions, and just be careful not to let, if they are part-time, do not let a part-time status block any kind of progression. I have seen it work so well, particularly with leaders in very senior roles, even within our own organisation here at More Pay and Zealous, where senior leaders have returned on shorter days or maybe 4 out of 5 days, and it has worked so well. The business has actually gained from that because they have been the employees have been treated with respect that they deserve, and they are giving their all back to the organisation. So on to flexible working requests. It's a really important part of employment legislation overall, but I think it's important to touch on it in this context to understand how it sits alongside returning from maternity leave, because it can be a common request for parents returning from maternity leave. Because as a new parent, or you're going from 1 to 2 children, parents are navigating a very different work-life balance or need. So this section is just basically going to talk you through how to deal with those work requests, flexible working requests that come in, and then things to think about alongside that. So since April 2024, employees have been able to request flexible working from day one, and it is one of the most common requests made by returning parents. Thinking back to the manager training that we talked around the leave framework, this is probably also part that comes on the end. Managers need to be well versed in understanding how to handle flexible working requests fairly, lawfully, whilst keeping in mind that the outcome of the request can shape an employee's future with the organisation. Again, no one is expecting them to be experts in the legalities of this. They will get the right support from their HR teams, their legal teams, their outsourced HR, but they need to feel confident themselves in dealing with it. And what we've done here, just to help you kind of contextualize this, is split into 4 key parts to remember. So the first is about understanding the request. Start with a clear conversation, asking what changes is being requested. Is it permanent, temporary, trial? What's the context of the request? The employees don't have to give a reason, but it is really important in understanding the why, because it helps you respond with empathy and fairness. So asking them those questions, and if they're in an environment where they feel that they can be open, then all the better. You are legally required to consult before you're making a decision. So make sure that managers know what the process is. I have seen examples in other organisations where managers feel that they can deal with this informally and have said yes or no, and then further down the line this has come back to haunt them, and it really is ill-advised. As soon as you get the flexible working request, you can still deal with it informally in terms of the way that you approach it with your employee, and the way that you are asking the right questions and feel like it's an open and honest culture, but it still has to be within the formal framework. So during that consultation, you've got to ensure that you respond within 2 months, including any appeal. Make sure there's a meeting to discuss that request where everything can be documented, and asking those questions that we talked about in point 1. Explore how it could work in practice, have those practical conversations, and ask their opinion on how they think they could mitigate any business impact it may have. If the original plan isn't workable, suggest alternatives, or ask them to suggest alternatives. And if you are unsure, there's always the option for a trial period to see how that works. And then the third point is around responding in writing. Always make sure that this is documented. So if you're approving or rejecting the request, it must be in writing and within the 2-month window. So if you're approving, confirm what the new pattern is in writing, update any contractuals that are needed around days of work, hours of work, salary, and then you may want to just agree a review point if appropriate to see how it's working on both sides. If you are refusing, you have to choose and you have to call out in your letters one of the 8 legal grounds to do so. So this is things like cost, performance, inability to reorganise work. There are 8 legal grounds and it has to link back to one of those. Clearly explain why this reason applies and how. Avoid vague statements like it is just not suitable for the business. Be as specific as you can be. And then consider offering an appeal process as a good practice. And then the final point to remember is around avoiding discrimination risks. So particularly around sex discrimination. So refusing a request, if we just flick onto the next slide. Thank you. So refusing a request from a mother returning to work may carry legal risks. It doesn't mean that you have to say yes, but you've got to have considered all this. It is particularly important if it is relating to childcare. So to stay compliant and fair, make sure that you assess all requests consistently and objectively across your organisation, explore alternatives before refusing, and just be aware of the risk of indirect sex discrimination. Overall, just remember that the legal compliance is the baseline. A supportive approach with open and honest communication goes so much further by reinforcing trust and helping parents succeed at work. Now, the last point that I'm going to come into, I appreciate that we have gone through an awful lot today. It is a huge topic with lots of information, but I just want to finalise by talking about emotional support, because I would say that outside the legal framework and some of the practical tips that we've given you to help support your employees' well-being before, during and after, that is just one part. And the potentially underestimated, or the part that's not given enough spotlight, is the benefit of emotional support. I have weaved it into the other areas, but I think it's just worthy of just a few slides on this. Of course, there are logistical and practical transitions that are going to need to be made, but understanding for an employee that it is a very personal and emotional time will really help you. So on to the next slide then. Many parents do come back juggling lots of things, including excitement, anxiety, exhaustion, uncertainty, and what you do to support during this time will help shape the well-being and long-term relationship your organisation have with this employee. You don't need to go to the point of launching a huge initiative, but sometimes, just the basic stuff or the most powerful things you can offer is just saying to someone, I understand, let's figure it out together. Recognise the emotional load that may come with being a new parent, guilt around leaving their child, sleep deprivation, loss of confidence, overwhelm from trying to juggle home and work life. And it's really all about acknowledging these feelings without judgment. It just helps returners feel seen and supported. Avoid minimising their concerns. Just check in with simple questions like, how are you finding things so far? In terms of communication on the next slide, the key is about communicating with care. And these are some of the softer skills that can be quite difficult for managers to put in place, but with the right training and support and right framework, they can do. Have open, honest communication. It just makes all the difference. Don't wait for issues to be raised, and create space for those regular and meaningful check-ins. Listen and reflect back to what you've heard and tailor your support. Be clear about changes to roles, teams, or expectations. Both ways that returners want to come back are completely valid. And again, in terms of having that open communication, I've said it a few times in this, just avoid making assumptions about how your employee feels. The final couple of slides then is about putting some structure behind this. Support shouldn't just rely on someone asking for help. So consider offering things like a buddying or mentor system, which I'm going to talk about in a sec. Think about parental networks and informal support and shared experience of people who've been in that situation. There might be development opportunities. Make sure you've got the right access to wellbeing support for your employees, whether that's EAP, mental health champions, HR contacts. And it's really good to have visible senior role models who balance work and parenthood. And I would say that that has been something in my own personal career that has made all the difference. Seeing people in senior roles that have openly talked about how they have balanced work and parenthood, how that has enhanced their career, some of the challenge they've faced. I personally think that's helped shape how I want to be as a leader, and I don't think the impact of that can be underestimated. If you're using some kind of phased return, think about how you do that thoughtfully to help ease them into the workplace, whether that's reduced hours, lighter workload, but again, very much led by them. And then the final slide is just really about this buddy or mentor system, and the thought that I'd like to leave you with today. So there is a chance that returning parents can feel out of place, even in a familiar environment, and even if that's only temporary. And having the opportunity for some kind of buddy system offers friendly, peer-based layer of support that might be a bit more beneficial than the managers, or in addition to the manager's support. It could give them a safe space to talk, encouragement from someone who's been there, helps understand the changes in the business, but from a less formal perspective, and can help the returner with a confidence boost by being given empathy and the ability to talk about shared experiences. It comes with benefits for the business though, and leads to things like higher retention engagement, a stronger sense of inclusion and belonging, and that will really radiate through your culture. It helps with progress on things like gender equality and pay gap goals, and gives a reputation for your organisation of genuinely being supported, and don't underestimate that. And honestly, setting up some kind of buddy or mentor system, it really doesn't need to be complex. Have people who want to be buddies, give them some kind of training in listening skills, boundaries, how best to interact. Pair with intention based on shared challenges or roles. Keep it light but consistent, just regular check-ins, let them guide how it looks, and then celebrate progress and small wins, and just ensure, as I said at the beginning, that it complements and doesn't replace that manager support. So a huge topic to go through. Thank you very much for sitting through this. I think we do have some time for questions, so I'm just going to hand over to Hannah to see if we can rattle through a few of those.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, we have received a few questions. Do keep posting your questions into the Q&A panel and we'll run through as many as we have time for. So the first question that we received was, do you think offering enhanced maternity pay is key to retaining female employees? We have some larger competitors in our area that are offering attractive packages.
I definitely think it's something to consider. It shows your commitment to supporting employees during maternity leave. It isn't a must, but the statutory maternity regulations are a baseline. And if you're looking at your overall framework, being able to offer an enhancement, even if it's not completely in line with your competitors, I just think it sets the right tone. And if you are able to do so, I would certainly encourage you to look at that. And it may cost more money in the short term, but if you were looking at stats of how many people return after maternity leave, when they leave, that might be a useful exercise. And then you could track progress and what you have gained from improving your maternity policy. I've worked in companies that have been through changes to their maternity policy and enhanced it, and I've definitely seen the benefit of the other side.
Thanks, Michelle. And next question is, my organisation is looking at implementing a new policy whereby everyone will need to be working in the office 3 days a week. And I'm concerned about how this will impact on employees that have got young children and how to navigate this with them.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think the key to this would be open and honest communication from the beginning about what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it's important. Allow your employees to raise any concerns. Again, don't jump to conclusions or assumptions, although it is great that this is on your mind. Just allow them a space to talk about it, because it might be something that could be resolved quite informally. Think about flexibility that you might be able to put in place even around being in the office 3 days a week, whether that is hours of work, reducing hours of work, or just a little bit of flexibility in start and finish times. And then if there are still issues after that, then obviously they would need to go down a formal flexible working request, which you would seek advice on and follow through the normal formal processes. But bringing along employees on that journey will make all the difference.
Thanks, Michelle. Right, moving on to the next question. So next question is, let me just have a quick look. We've got, next question was around the breastfeeding support and where would be an appropriate place for an employee to express within an office environment.
It needs to be somewhere private, somewhere comfortable, and somewhere that there's potential lock on the door. So it's advisable to have a separate room and maybe repurpose a small room. If you're in a shared office, then maybe somewhere in the central area. So I know that there's certain businesses where they have, they're in a shared office, and in the main part of the shared building there is an appropriate room. If you're in a building just on your own, you just really need to think about how you can create a safe space. It doesn't have to just be a breastfeeding room, but it needs to be a room that could be used for breastfeeding, whether that's repurposing a small meeting room, or whether that's some sort of, I don't know, stationery cupboard that can be cleared out and that can be moved somewhere else. Should really think about the practicalities that is going to give someone privacy. And it all depends on the size of your organisation. If you're a large organisation, you probably do need to have somewhere permanent, because you might have a constant, steady sort of influx of returners who want to be able to do this. If you're a smaller organisation, it might be a one-off and temporary request. Just make sure that it is comfortable and private for them.
Thanks, Michelle. So the next question, we have a member of staff going on maternity leave who wants her maternity cover to send her a monthly update document. Is this standard practice?
I wouldn't say that it's standard practice. There is no requirements on either an employee or a business to produce updates in any kind of way. The best way to approach this would be relatively informally. And unless there is something that you're concerned about in terms of them having monthly updates, I don't see a problem with it. It might even be just a quick check-in that they have with their maternity cover. It might be through you. You need to agree what is best for both of them. So think about the person who's on maternity leave. Leaving a job and having somebody cover your maternity leave is a naturally anxious time for an employee, because you think someone else is coming in to do the job that I normally do and I'm not there to do it. Equally, it's probably a little bit anxious for the person coming in and covering maternity leave. So agree with the two people how this is best to work. And if it is something that can just be, a quick document of here are the key things that have happened this month, and it might be that rather than talking to the employees covering their maternity leave, it's a manager check-in. You got the update, how are things going, any questions? Just think about how you can add some flexibility and informality to do that. Because what you want to avoid is either party in that situation feeling like they are critiquing the other person's work. It's a tricky one, but a great question.
It is a good question. So next question is around redundancy. If we have two female employees in a redundancy pool, but one is on maternity leave, should the other automatically get made redundant, even if the one who is on maternity leave scores lower on the criteria?
Yeah, there is a very specific framework now supporting employees, and if there is a suitable alternative, the person who is on maternity leave or for a period after they have returned from maternity leave, they are supported. What I would say is that before you make any decisions, so it was from April 24 that redundancy protection extended to 18 months after birth, and you must give priority to a suitable role. And this is to protect employees. But I really would recommend either talking to your internal HR team or talking to your outsourced provider. If you're a more pay customer, please ring our advice line, speak to one of our HR experts, because we can help you work through what that process will actually look like, because there needs to be a very clear and documented process that's followed to protect both employees.
Thanks, Michelle. So just got time for a couple more questions. So next question, how would you approach it if an individual has asked for enhanced maternity pay, but it's not a company-wide policy? Could you make an exception for that individual, or would that then be classed as discrimination to everybody else?
I would be wary of that if it is not how you consistently approach in your organisation. The best way to get the benefits of supporting employees during maternity and on their return is around consistency, in my eyes. So, whilst not necessarily a practice that is legally forbidden, it would come with some red flags and may open you up to challenges further down the line, in terms of practice for people going forward and people who have gone before. Because with the best will in the world, I'm sure we've all experienced this, employees do talk, and these things have a habit of getting out. It isn't that you can't necessarily do that. I would just make sure that if you're doing it again, you seek some kind of advice on how to do this in the most fair, appropriate way that avoids risks in the future.
Thanks, Michelle. So, final question. We have had a few questions around the line manager training. So, we've had a question around whether line managers should be trained on emotional support. And we've also had a more general question saying, do we have any recommendations for where people could look for some training in this area for their managers?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think sometimes one of the underutilized parts of training managers is around the softer skills. There's a lot of focus on the practicalities, the frameworks, the policies. The way we approach things at MorePay when we are doing training for our customers and for their managers is to do a combination of both, to put the framework and the policy and the legalities up front, and then dovetail that with the softer skills that come with managing these very difficult and complex situations and giving them the confidence. I'm sure there are lots of opportunities for you to look at training online, but if it's something that we could help you with, then we could certainly be in touch to discuss opportunities for manager training that will include those softer skills.
Thanks, Michelle. So we will close off the Q&A there. Thanks to everybody that did ask a question. I think that was a really interesting Q&A session. So we have just a couple of slides to wrap up for today. I will point you in the direction of our Knowledge Centre. If you've not been on here before, you can access it from the homepage of our website. And it's packed with lots of useful resources. There's lots of other blogs and guides and what have you, and webinar recordings around the topic of maternity. And everything is free to download. So I would advise you to go and have a look there. And we also post our upcoming webinars on there, so you'll be able to see the webinars coming up for the rest of this year. And also a little bit about our HR support. So if you would like to find out more about our software and services, there will be a pop-up form once I close the webinar where you can register your interest, and one of my colleagues will be in touch with you. Our HR and employment law service and advice line runs 24/7, 365 days a year. So no matter when an HR issue crops up, best practice employment law advice is always available over the phone, anytime, and delivered by our highly experienced team of qualified experts. And finally, I've also included a link to our guide to total HR management. We believe that when combined with expert HR support, HR software transforms workforce management, allowing businesses to stay compliant, reduce costs, and enhance overall productivity. So you can simply click on the link here and have a read of the guide. So that just leads me to thank Michelle for a really interesting webinar this morning. There was lots covered, and I will be sending you the copy of the recording and the slides this afternoon so that you've got that to refer back to. So thanks to everybody that joined this morning and for the questions that you asked, and I will now close the webinar. Thanks everyone.